Hi, folks, it's Derek McCann again, and today I want to take you through something called the EI experience. Now, if you haven't actually seen this already, I need to really tell you this is the single most effective promotion tool, presentation tool, and communication tool that we have in the Genos repertoire for really having a big impact on people and making them understand just how important emotional intelligence is. Let me tell you when you'd need this. You'll need this first time you meet a client, particularly one who has no idea what emotional intelligence is. You'll have it anytime you want to do a 20 or 30-minute presentation and you want to impact people dramatically and get them to want to talk to you about how they can make their leaders and their team members more emotionally intelligent. You'll use it to open pretty much every presentation that you do, and you'll even use it, I'll tell you at the end, there are a couple of ways that you can use it just on one-on-one conversations where you're not using the deck that you're going to see today. What I'm going to present to you today is a formal version of what we call the EI experience. And the formal version consists of three parts. The first part is the deck that we're going to use, the deck that you're looking at right now. The second part, let me flick to it, is the EI experience handout, and you'll see how that's used during the presentation to have some really tremendous impact. And then the third part is a script. Let me just go to that script, which is designed to take you step by step through everything that I'm covering in this recording. When you're finished listening to the recording, you'll be able to go to the buttons. If you're looking at this in Genos University, there will be buttons there to allow you to download this PowerPoint deck, download the script, download the handout, and download any other resources that over time we feel are appropriate for you to have and are associated with the EI experience. So let me go back to the main screen and get this show on the road. The first thing I want to do is give a shout out to the two people who were most instrumental in creating this, and that was Jeff and Debbie in Red Diamond Solutions, a wonderful partner in our distributor in the United States. And they looked at our stuff, fell instantly in love with the Genos approach, and came up with this superb idea for getting across just how impactful EI is. So thank you, Jeff and Debbie. So let's go through the presentation. I'll kind of do it half talking to you and half of this as if I was talking to an audience. I'm also going to give you a link in Genos University to a presentation where I did this online, and you can hear it actually done live. Now, part of that presentation, when I call people in, to talk on the telephone, because there's an awful lot of background noise, is not wonderful. But you'll hear how the script flows very, very nicely as a promotional piece. But let's dive straight into it. The objective of this is to give people an EI experience, or rather, to show them that they're always having EI experiences, that they have had in their lives high emotional intelligent people who had positive impact upon them, and low emotional intelligence people who had a negative impact upon them, and that they probably didn't even notice the part that emotional intelligence was playing in the way those people impacted them. Now we're going to have them experience it, and you're going to experience them experiencing for the first time what it really is like to live in a world where people are highly emotionally intelligent. So let's dive into it. In advance of the session, if it's a formal session where you're meeting them in a room, or you have a chance to do this, or you can send it out for a webinar, as I did in the other recording that I'll give you an access to, you can send them this nice form that's there for you to download. And it just looks kind of sexy, and it formalizes the whole exercise. But let me stress, all they actually need to do or participate in this exercise is a piece of paper and a pen. That's all. After that, it'll work just as well with this or with the form, but the form's kind of nice in a formal presentation situation. So we start off by telling them that you are continually being impacted by the people that you work with. Every person that you deal with has an impact upon you, and it affects your behaviors, and it affects the decisions you make and the way you interact with them. None more so than your boss. And in the past, I know, if you're like the majority of other audiences, that you have had high emotional intelligent boss and low emotional intelligent bosses. And I want to tune you into the difference between those. So to get that going, I'd like you to take out the 2-page form that we gave you and think of the best boss you ever worked for. Now, in the form it says worked with or worked for. Ideally, we'd like to have somebody that you actually worked for who was your boss. But if you've never had a boss who was inspiring, who was motivational, who was engaging, who was a great boss, well, then think of somebody like a coworker, a mentor, a coach who had those same sort of qualities. And I'd just like you to put their name down on the top of that sheet. And if it's a plain sheet of paper, just write down their name and draw a line underneath it. And then we're ready to go. Now, in a moment, I'm going to ask you to try and remember how they turned up, how they behaved with you, and how they interacted with you. And I'm going to read out 6 behaviors, single lines, and I'm going to ask you to rate the extent to which this great boss demonstrated these behaviors. And down the bottom of the screen there, you can see there's a key that runs from 1 to 5. If they demonstrated that behavior significantly more than others, in other words, if it was absolutely the way they behave day to day, you give them a score of 5. If they never demonstrated that behavior or demonstrated significantly less than you'd see other people doing it, you'll give them a 1. And you can see there's a range from 1 to 5 to allow you to accommodate the people who are in between. So let's get it started. I'm going to read out 6 statements to you. And I just want you to think of these behaviors and rate this great boss in terms of how well he or she demonstrated those behaviors. So thinking of this great boss, how well did they demonstrate awareness of their mood and emotions? So did they do that really, really well, significantly more than is typical? Or did they do it really, really badly, significantly less than is typical? Or were they somewhere in between? So give them a score from 5 high down to 1 low. Do that now. And the next behavior. Think of the extent to which that person made other people feel appreciated. If they never did that, if they didn't make anyone feel appreciated, it's a 1. If they did it as much as anybody else, but not especially well, then it's probably a 3. If they did it much more than others and it was really a hallmark of their style, it's a 5. So give them a score somewhere between 1 and 5 on the sheet now. And the third behavior is the extent to which they were open and honest about mistakes. If they absolutely confessed up every time they made a mistake or screwed up in some way and they just came clean, then they're probably a 5 or a 4. If they absolutely never did that, if they tended to hide their mistakes and were dishonest about them, they're a 1 or a 2. So score that between 5 high and 1 low now. And with number 4, we want to look at the extent to which they make ethical decisions. So if all of the decisions they made were very soundly ethical, you'd give them a 5. If they really had an ethics bypass and never really made ethical decisions, you give them a 1. So give them a score between 1 and 5 that reflects the extent to which you experienced they made ethical decisions. And by the way, folks, as you're listening to this, and I'm talking to you as the Genos partner audience, I should have said at the beginning, it might be a good idea for you to actually go through this exercise with me. So perhaps what you should do is just pause the tape or the recording for now, get a sheet of paper and catch up on those scoring those 4 behaviors for your great boss, because I think it's a good idea for you to experience it. And then we'll continue. Okay, so welcome back. We're going to go now to number 5. The 5th behavior is the extent to which they manage their emotions effectively in difficult situations. So a person who did that badly, a 1, explodes every time something goes wrong. You can't bring them bad news. Things cannot go wrong. They lose their temper, they lose their head, or they maybe even fall into a funk and a depression. That would be a 1. If they kept their cool, if they kept their act together, despite the fact that maybe they were experiencing anger or disappointment or whatever, well, then they're probably a 5. So rate them on the extent to which they manage their emotions effectively in difficult situations. And the final behavior, to what extent do they recognize others' hard work and achievements? If every time you achieve something, they pretty much celebrated, gave you a slap on the back, told you that a boy, and made you feel good about it, they're a 5. If they basically just took everything that you gave, regardless how good it was, never recognized any of your hard work and your achievements, they're a 1. So if they're somewhere in between, score them somewhere in between. So now you have 6 scores, all between 1 and 5, and I'd like you to add them up to get a total score that will run somewhere between 5 and 30. And just write that score on the sheet or the piece of paper. And if it's just a sheet of paper, draw a line under those ratings. So I'd like you to think about that great boss now, that inspiring or charismatic boss. And I want you to think, what was it like to be around that person? How did you feel when you were with them? So underneath the ratings, just write down a few words as to how they made you feel. So, bullet points are absolutely fine. Maybe they made you feel positive, upbeat, excited, valued, or maybe they made you feel negative, down, depressed, sad. Whatever it was, just think, what was it like to be around that person? How did they make you feel? And take a few minutes to write down those words. So now let me step out and talk to you, Genos partner. At this stage, make sure you give them a few minutes to get these words down. This is important. And watch their faces as they write these words down. Watch the emotion that's in their faces. What you're going to see, in general, are positive emotions. You'll see it in their body language. You see it in their faces. When you feel that they've pretty much run dry, or that each of them have 5 or 6 or 7 or more words down on how they made them feel, only then do you move on, but give them time for this. Let them capture this. This will be important when you debrief later. So stepping back into role, now folks, let's just talk about something called discretionary effort. And those of you who are familiar with emotional intelligence have probably heard this expression before, but let me define it for you. A formal discretionary effort definition is it is the level of effort that people in a job could give if they wanted to, but that is above the minimum required. And to paraphrase it, it's really discretionary effort is going that extra mile. So discretionary effort is high if working for a boss, you would run through a wall for them. You would walk over hot coals for them. You'd do anything you could to help them and the organization be successful. Well, then that's a high discretionary effort. You would give them more than the minimum required in the job. If they were somebody to whom you were only going to give the bare minimum in order to get by, in order to not be challenged on the job, well, then they'd be low. So down the bottom of your form, I'd like you to rate your discretionary effort when you were working for this person. Was it up the high end? And if so, how high? Or was it down the low end? And if so, how low? So just rate that now. Take a moment just to give a rating between 1 and 10 on how inclined you were to give your very best to this person. Great. So let's go to the dark side now. What I'm going to ask you to do is think of a boss that you worked for who was more difficult or challenging. And I don't mean challenging in the positive sense that they brought the best out of you. I mean in the sense that no matter what you did, they challenged it or found problems with it. They were difficult, uninspiring, and they disengaged you. So if you don't want to reveal that person's name, use an initial, use a code name, anything you like, but just get something down so that you remember who you were thinking about earlier on. And I noticed that most people tend to get this fairly quickly. They know exactly who they're going to put down on the sheet. So now we're going to go back through exactly the same exercise. We're going to ask you to rate the way they showed up, the behaviors that they exhibited, the way they interacted with you. So tell me, on a scale running from 5 high down to 1 low, to what extent did this person demonstrate awareness of their mood and emotions? Give them a score between 1 and 5, where 5 is the best and 1 is the worst. Second, to what extent did this person make other people feel appreciated? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. How open and honest were they about their mistakes? 5 if they were absolutely brutally honest, and 1 if they were never honest. To what extent did they make ethical decisions? 5 is high, 1 is low. How did they manage their emotions in difficult situations? Were they inclined to blow up, get angry, get down, and really react in a negative emotional way? If so, score them around a 1. If not, score them around a 5. And if somewhere in between, score them somewhere in between. And finally, how effective were they in recognizing others' hard work and achievements? 5 high, 1 low. And so the same deal again. Please add those numbers up and you'll get a score that runs somewhere between 5 and 30. So take a moment to add those up. Now, again, stepping out and talking to you as a Genos partner, when you're letting them add them up, watch them to make sure you're giving them enough time. I tend to rush this a little bit. You do not go at the pace that I'm going in this presentation, which is a walkthrough for you. So make sure they have plenty of time. And then, folks, I'd like you to think about, what was it like to be around that person? How did they make you feel? How did they impact you? So write down some words that describe the way they made you feel. If they made you feel upbeat, positive, and inspired, write down words like that and anything else that comes into your mind. If they made you feel uninspired and downbeat and negative, well, again, words like that. Whatever words come into your mind. And I'm going to give you a few minutes to write those words down. And that's what you do, folks. Give them a few minutes. Make sure that they are getting some down. Let them think about it. And please, as you're doing this, stay very self-aware and aware of the other people in the room. Watch their faces as they write this. Watch for the emotion. Watch for those people who are scribbling down lots and lots of words and where the emotion that's connected with those words is very, very apparent. Okay? Then finally, I'd like you to think, how hard were you prepared to work for this person? Now, you're a person who has a good work ethic, and you give a fair day's work, I'm sure, for a fair day's pay. But how effectively did this person inspire you to give your very best? If they inspired you 100% to give the very best you could, well, then they're a 10. If they didn't inspire you at all, and your inclination, your tendency was to think, I'm not going to try any harder than I need to, well, then it's a 1. And you just so rate them between 1 and 10. Okay, now you're going to see this. You're going to see this slide in your deck, and you'll notice that basically what I say is that I've hidden the next 7 slides. Normally speaking, it's a great idea after you've done the data collection, let's call it the first part of this exercise, to go off and do some other content before you debrief it. And let me drop out of presentation mode on PowerPoint here and show you what I have hidden. What I often use this is I do the opening with the EI exercise, EI experience, and then I drop into a few slides where I'm introducing Genos International. And those slides are in the deck in case you want to use them. But you could have a profile of your organization. You could talk about something else related to the topic you're talking about. You could talk about the training that you do, the services that you offer, and so on and so forth. Anything at all before you go back to debrief it. But it is a really good idea to make that break between getting them to think about that and then debriefing them. For some reason, it tends to have a much better impact when you do it that way. Now, in a separate recording, I'll walk through how you present these 7 slides for Genos. Right now, I don't want to distract you from the main show here today, which is on the EI experience. So once you've done that middle segue piece, well, then you come back and you say, now, let's have a look at what you did, at the scores you gave me there earlier on the Great Boss. So tell me, what was your score for the Great Boss? So go around the room and have people just call out their scores. And as they call them out, acknowledge them. So what you're going to find is, in general, these scores will certainly be higher than 17, 18, 19. And very frequently, they will be 23, 24, 25, sometimes up even as high as 28, 29. So for the Great Boss, you'll tend to get, pretty healthy scores out of 30. Almost always north of the sort of 75 percentile. So kind of, certainly above the 20 in the main, but always or almost always over 16, 17. So go around the room and let them call them out. And then for contrast, you say, and what was the score of the difficult people? And what you'll see right away in the majority, but not necessarily all cases, is a very dramatic contrast between the score levels, where the score levels for the great boss will tend to be at the, as I say, 17, 18, 19, all the way up to 30. The score for the others will tend to be, oh my God, it can go from 13 at a high and sometimes higher, all the way down to 5 or 6. So when people call out, a 5 or a 6, acknowledge it. Say, my God, gee, that must have been a great experience. Some other time I'd like to talk to you about that. 14, okay, that's interesting. So they weren't too bad, but there's still pretty much a gap between the scores that great boss got and the other boss got. And what's a good idea, folks, while you're collecting this is capture these scores on a flip chart. That way you can at the end say something like this. You could say, hey, look here, the lowest score that we got there was a 6. The highest score was a 27. So what we've seen right now already is that it is possible to identify very clearly, simply by looking at their behavior, the difference between bosses that make you feel positive, upbeat, inspired, and what people might even call those charismatic bosses. And there's a very big difference between those and the others who make you feel downcast, who make you feel negative, and make you feel disconnected. And you can measure that. In just a couple of looking at their behaviors and rating them, you were able to score 2 people from your experience that are very particular to you and separate them just by looking at their scores on how they behaved. So the first realization from this exercise is the way people show up and the way they behave has a dramatic impact on the way they impact people. Now what I'd like you to tell me is, give me a few of those words that you had written down for the great boss. How did they make you feel? And again, folks, go around the room and make sure you absolutely milk every single word you can out of them where they give them. So you'll get words like inspiring, or they made me feel inspired, they made me feel positive, fulfilled, relaxed, comfortable, valuable, and acknowledge them and talk them through and even scribble some of those down on the board if you can. Get those superlatives down. These are all going to be, for the most part, really, really big positive words. Get those all out and then turn to the dark. Now, here's where you really want to be looking for emotion. You watch people's faces, listen to their tone of voice as they deliver the words when you say, and how did the difficult boss make you feel? And you make it all right for them to express that by maybe slowing things down a little bit and bringing the tone of your voice down to a little slightly more serious. How did this person make you feel? And by keeping it slower, you make it more solemn and more serious. And they're going to say things like valueless. They're going to say things like disengaged. They're going to say things like negative and useless. And the range of words that come out here and the emotion that goes with them is such that you really want to acknowledge them and say, good Lord, useless. How can one person make somebody else feel useless? That's dreadful. I'm sorry about that. Somebody else. Capture those words. And what again, at the end of this, you're going to say, so look at our great boss. Look at the person who got the highest score. They made you feel, and read the words, empowered, positive, upbeat, cared for, etc. Versus that negative boss who made you feel downbeat, made you feel valueless, made you feel useless, and so on. The way we behave, particularly if we're leaders, has a huge impact on the way people experience us. And that's really important because the way they experience us and the impact we have upon people directly impacts their discretionary effort. So earlier we spoke about how hard did you want to work for this great boss? What was the discretionary effort you were prepared to give them? And you rated it from 10 to 1. Please, people, can you just call out what scores you got? Folks, go around the room, get the scores. Generally speaking, 7 and upwards is what you're going to expect. There will be outliers. Sometimes you'll get 4s and 5s. There are other factors going on there. But in general, these are going to be people that inspired these people in the room to work that little bit harder and to want to get the best possible results they could for them. So draw out those scores, make sure everybody shares, and then the same with the difficult boss. Now, before you ask for the score for the difficult boss, you say, I know that people like us tend to have a set of values that mean we want to give a fair day's work for a fair day's pay. What I want you to do is when you scored this was think, how did they make you want to contribute? Maybe you pushed yourself, but how far would you have pushed yourself for them? How were you inclined to push yourself? The scores you're going to get here are going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe. Generally below the midpoint on the scale. And again, here's your point and here's how you debrief it. You're a person who goes to work with the intention of working. You go to work with the intention of being happy, contributing what you can contribute. You have the values that make you do that. And yet, the way 2 people in your life behaved so very differently had a dramatic impact upon the discretionary effort that you were inclined to give. This is what we refer to as employee engagement. When people are so engaged with their jobs that they want to give the best possible input that they can, when they are engaged, the organization gets better outputs, better results, and all of the stats say that it directly impacts the bottom line. So you can measure the difference between great, inspiring bosses who make people feel good and make people want to give the best results they possibly can. And the great thing about this is this all comes down to behavior. This all came down to the way that person turned up and dealt with you and interacted with you. That made all of the difference. And one of the great implications is if you discover or one of your colleagues discover that some of the behaviors that you're bringing to bear in the workplace are not serving you well, if they're not helping you to engage people and they're maybe even disengaging people, you have a choice. You can change it or not. And as a Genos partner, you have an opportunity to help these people change it. So folks, talking to the people in the room, if you are not getting the engagement that you want from your people, you can change it, because the single biggest contributor to employee engagement is the relationship that an employee has with their individual manager. One final question I want to ask you folks is, just how many years is it since you worked with that positive role model, with that great boss? Are you working with them right now? Would it be 5 years or more, 10 years or more, 15 years or more? Again, folks, go around the room, get people to call out how recent it was, and make particular note of those situations, which will be there in a group where people are, it's 10 years or it's 15 or 20, or depending on the age group, maybe 25 years since they worked with that person. And when you get those longer times, just say, hey, do you notice that? This person worked with you 10 or 15 years ago, and you still remember the impact they had upon you. You still remember them as an exemplary, inspiring, and charismatic boss. What about that more negative person? What were they like? What you find, folks, is that they tend, if anything, to remember this person even more. And it very, very often goes back to early in their career. So depending on the age group, you could have 10, 15, 20, 25 years ago since they dealt with that person. So you, based on your behavior, can have an impact upon people that makes them want to engage with their job, makes them feel so good that they want to give the very best that they can, and leaves them with an impression of you that lasts, if not forever, well, certainly for an awful lot of years, just simply based on how you behave. And that's what we in Genos do. We measure behavior. We measure the extent to which people demonstrate emotional, intelligent behaviors like the ones we just looked at. And in the experience, we got you looking at some of the things we measure. We measure 6 scales in the model. And the first one is self-awareness. Self-awareness is just the extent to which you have an awareness of how your behavior impacts upon other people. And people who are high in that, we talk about them as being present because they're very aware of what's going on with themselves and how they're impacting people. And those who are low in it, we talk about as being disconnected. Now, in each of the 6 scales, like self-awareness, we have 7 questions we ask. We used just one of those questions from each of those scales to get you to rate those 2 people. Now, I want you to think about that. There are 42 questions in the complete GENOS model. And yet, with just 6 of those questions, you had enough to be able to clearly score the difference between an engaging and a disengaging manager. Imagine if you had 7 questions in each of these scales that we're going to look at. Imagine just how much more, first off, descriptive you could be of how they behave. And if you can describe exactly what behaviors work in terms of engaging you and which behaviors don't, that person has an opportunity to change the way they show up, because we all have a choice about our behavior. The second scale is awareness of others. Exactly the same as self-awareness, but the mirror turned through 180 degrees. At the high end, people who are aware of others are empathetic. They appreciate the way emotions of a situation are impacting the behaviors and decisions that others are making. They would be described as empathetic. Down the low end, described as insensitive. And the item we used from that was make others feel appreciated. Remember, there are 6 more questions in there on awareness of others to allow you not to just get black and white, but to get shades of gray in terms of the way people behave in their awareness of others. Third scale is authenticity. And authenticity is pretty much what it says on the wrapper. At the high end, it's genuine. You say what's going on in your mind in an appropriate way. You let people know how you think and feel about things. At the high end, you come across as genuine. At the low end, you come across as untrustworthy. And the item we used for that is open and honest about mistakes, one of just 7 that looks at people's authenticity. For emotional reasoning, we looked at how effectively you use the information that comes from being more self-aware and aware of other people to make effective decisions. People who are aware of their own emotions and other people's emotions and how they're impacting behaviors and decisions have a much more expanded range of options. They make better decisions. The ones who are not operating with that awareness are missing some vital data, and they tend to be limited in the scope of decisions they can make. And the item we used from that was makes ethical decisions. To what extent did this person use their awareness of themselves and other people to make the right decisions, ethical decisions? The 5th scale is one that's very dear to the hearts of very many of your client organizations worldwide now, because it talks about resilience, the extent to which people can manage difficult emotions in tough times to remain resilient and functional. So people who are able to deal with tough, difficult emotions and remain functional are resilient. At the low end, they're temperamental. And by temperamental, I mean that if the emotional climate in the room changes, they change with it. So the item we used was manages their emotions effectively in difficult situations. And the final scale was positive influence. And let's face it, we all prefer to work in a workplace where we work with people who are enthusiastic and energetic because they enthuse and energize us. People who come to the workplace bringing that energy are empowering for everybody. People who are not are at best indifferent, and I'd say they're probably enfeebling in that they drag other people down. And that's the GENOS model. The last item that we used from positive influence, or the item we used from positive influence, was recognizes others' hard work and achievements. So we used just 6 items. Remember, there are 42 altogether. Imagine if you rated those 2 bosses using the 42 items. Imagine how much more complete and how much more detailed the picture you'd build of that person was. Now imagine that they had an opportunity to look at that picture. They'd see the behaviors that are serving them well, and they'd see the behaviors that are not serving them at all. And you give them a choice. They now have the ability to change that behavior with your help, through your coaching or your training or your mentoring or your support. But you give them choice. You give them choice about their behavior, which gives them the ability to be inspiring, charismatic, to impact people in a way that gets the maximum discretionary effort. And if this is important for people in everyday situations, well, then it's particularly important for leaders. We have a version of the model that is particularly used for the leadership environment, with an applied leadership model. The major difference is those 42 items talk in leadership terms. They talk in the language that people who are responsible for managing other people to get the best results would tend to use. The model is the same in all respects except the last scale. It's a slightly different name because it's all, when you're a leader, about inspiring others to produce great results, to empowering them to get results and not being indifferent to them. So that's how you measure EI. So with anybody in any position, you can look at how do they show up right now? What's their behavior like? You can talk about what impact it has upon them. And if you can measure it, you can reveal it to them and help them to understand how to change it. And that's what Genos do. The reports we produce allow people to get a snapshot of how they're seen to turn up at a point in time and to help them to make the changes that allow them to turn up in the way that they want to. And in general, look at the literature and the leadership literature right now. What are they saying about great leaders? They're saying, in general, the language is that they are present, they're empathetic, they're genuine, they're expansive, they're resilient, and they're empowering, as much more of the time than other people. None of us are perfect, but when we know how we should be behaving, there's a better chance we'll behave that way and get the results we want. So that's the EI experience, folks. Now, before I close this down, let me talk just about 2 or 3 options on how you can use this. You've just seen it walk through with the slide deck on a PC. That is perfect for doing it in front of a formal audience where you've got a PowerPoint deck. But you don't need the deck. You could do this with flip charts from the front of a room, very, very casually, where you have each of the behaviors up on a flip chart page. You spin them over and you just ask people to rate them from 1 to 5 on a plain piece of paper. So that's one possible option. Another is sitting with an individual. You could have a card in your pocket that has the 6 items on it. And you could ask them, again, to go through that process of identifying the best boss and the challenging boss and go through it on a scrap of paper in a very informal way. And the final way that I often use this, and I think it's really, really effective, is a cut-down version, and I call it the beer mat version, because you're having a drink with somebody or you're having dinner with somebody and they say, what is this emotional intelligence thing anyway? So you say, think about the best boss you ever worked for. Now tell me, how did she make you feel? How was it to work with that person? And write down the words that they come up with on the back of a beer mat if you need, on the back of a business card. Now think of the most uninspiring, the worst boss you ever worked for. How did they make you feel? Write it down. Now notice the difference between those 2 sets of words. Notice the impact they had upon you. That's emotional intelligence. And what we in Genos, or what I as a partner in Genos do, is I help my clients to measure exactly how people are experiencing them right now, how emotionally intelligent they're behaving, and I show them exactly how they can adapt their behavior to become inspiring, engaging, and charismatic. This EI experience is the single most powerful tool we have for presenting the concept of EI. A final word on it. Almost nobody else, none of our competitors can do this because their models are too complex. They are not focused sufficiently well on the demonstration of clearly connected, emotionally intelligent behaviors. So in doing this, you're doing an exercise that people won't have seen before. You'll be able to clearly show to people who use more complex models, like the Baron or the ESCI or any of the other older models out there, you'll be able to show them how the Genos model, which was specifically designed for organizational development, for coaching, training, consulting, and mentoring people to behave more effectively, to get better results, you'll be able to show them how this is a superior solution. So if you've just finished your certification, go back, download this script, download the deck that we've just looked at, and start rehearsing. Get to a point where you are able to do this in your sleep, because you need to be using this with everybody you meet from now on. This is the single best door opener you have. So download the material, rehearse it, get familiar with it. And if you have any difficulties or questions, contact your distributor, contact your Genos main contact, the person who's brought you into the business, who's certified you, because they will be an expert on this already. So thank you for your time. Thank you for your attention. And feel free to drop a comment down below if you're watching this in Genos University. Thanks a million.